And we're back. So when we left off, we had just started adding a little bit of detail and fixing a few areas where there were some issues with the geometry. And now there's one larger issue that we need to resolve before we go and add wings, and then there'll be a bunch of fine-tuned detail that we can potentially add later. And that big issue is that the edges here are not quite where we want them, right? Specifically around where the cockpit is. If we look at this top view, you'll see that the body should be reasonably flat on the sides of the cockpit, and the cockpit tapers in pretty significantly. And so we need to make a decision as to where we're going to cut this geometry to essentially add another edge. And I'm in edges mode right now. And this is something where it just takes some experience and trying to think about like what's going to cause the least amount of work. How am I going to need, if I cut in a particular place, will that mean that I need to then move fewer points or move more points? And so in this mode, right, we also have these extra lumps here that we need to have a cut so we can pull vertices out there in the back of the X-wing body. And those don't exist on the bottom side, right? So we really just have to worry about those on the top. So we need to be able to hit those and taper in this the cockpit. And so with that, we have to figure out, do we want to cut? We want to do a long cut, and so I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter K and then L on the keyboard. We want to do a long cut, and the question is, do we want to do our cut on the inside of this existing edge, or do we want to do our cut on the outside of that existing edge? And either one would work, but we know that we've already got the height and everything correct here, and if we go ahead and cut here, and then we scoot the cockpit over, we're going to have to move a lot more points. And so I think it's going to be best to do a cut really close to this edge, but have it on the inside, and then we can pull all of these points. These points will probably stay about where they are, but we can taper this point in towards the center, and these other edges that go with it can go in towards the center too. And then we can pull this down and out a little bit to create that additional point while we maintain a point back here. I think that's going to be best. I think that's the least amount of work. And I don't know what just happened. Oh, okay, it just spazzed on me. All right. So so I'm going to go ahead and cut there, and you could zoom in. If you cut too close, it's going to be hard to select the individual sets of points when you go to use the live selection tool. So just be aware of that if you go too close, it might be problematic just in terms of actually being able to select the points. But I'm going to get pretty close so I don't lose a whole lot of distance. And you'll notice that it is going to be cutting down through the bottom of the model too, which is fine. We don't need to manipulate those points. So we'll leave those alone. We'll probably leave those alone. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select this and cut it. And then I'm going to hit the space bar, so I have my selection tool. Now currently loop selection is selected, but I probably want to go back to live selection, and I'm probably going to go into points mode. And we'll kind of look at some of the ways that we can start to move specifically this edge. But let's go ahead and, because we want this to come down now on the side, right? And so I have live selection, and I just got rid of loop selection, but let's go ahead and select loop selection. Oh, and that's hilarious. I was just on what I wanted to select. So really what I want to select is this edge. I'm going to go ahead and select loop selection, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something called slide, which will allow me to essentially slide this down this edge without changing the geometry, right? So this angle will stay the same, and this edge is just going to slide down. And then there will be a little bit more, there will be a little bevel in there until we adjust the rest of those. And I don't want this entire thing to slide down, right? I want basically right around the cockpit to do so. And so maybe loop selection wasn't the best option. Maybe what I should do is to adjust this. But actually what I think I do want this whole top edge to slide down a little bit so I have enough room to move and adjust these points, and then I can pull this back up as is needed. So, but I don't want to pull this bottom edge anywhere. So how do I eliminate part of a selection when I have this huge loop selected? The easiest way to do that is to use one of the other selection tools. And so we have live selection, which we've used a lot, and we've used loop selection. There's ring selection, which, you know, if I click on this, I want to show you what it does. We're not going to do anything, but you can see it selects like a ring of edges or a ring of vertices when you're doing that. So instead of going along the length that you're hovering, it wraps around the model, which can be really useful. But we're not going to use it right now. So there's other options here, but what we want, we're actually going to go up to the menu. There's a select menu at the top of the screen that has all of the selection options. And I do want you to notice that the selection options that we've got all also have a UL, right? So they have that U tilde whatever. So if you hit the letter U, that opens up the selection menu. And the selection option that I want is the selection option that I want is down at the bottom. This is where live selection lives. Notice that's the number 9 on your keyboard is also a shortcut for it because there aren't enough shortcuts. But what we want is, in this case, we're going to do the rectangle selection. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the rectangle selection. And I'm going to go into my side view, which actually I can't see my selection at all through there because of the side that view is on. So instead I am going to go ahead and do perspective. And what I want to do is I basically want to do this selection. So I'm selecting everything. I'm deselecting everything on the bottom of the model right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just click and drag and hold down Control and deselect that. Oops. What the hell? Yeah, okay. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this here. I'm going to hold down Control first, and then I'm going to hover kind of off the side of the nose, click and drag to create this rectangle of selection. And what this is doing, by holding down Control, it will deselect all of those things. And then there's a couple other edges that I want to deselect, right? I want to deselect this one, and if there's anything at the nose, I want to deselect that too. So I'm going to go back to my live selection. Notice that it says rectangle selection here now, but if I click and hold, I can get back to live selection. And so I'm going to hold down Control, I'm going to deselect that, I'm going to zoom into the nose, and I'm also going to hold down Control and deselect anything that's selected over there, right? So now it should just be this top edge that is selected. And once I've done that, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And in order to find all of the mesh tools, because there's some that are not down here, this slide is down here, but if you want to be working on a mesh of any sort, there's this mesh menu up here that has all of these tools. It has a bunch of add tools, remove tools, clone, cut, and move is where slide is also located, right? And what slide does is it basically just makes sure you're sliding it in the same plane that it's currently in. So if I hit the letter M and, where'd slide go? If I hit the letter M and O, or I click on slide, then what I can do is I can take whatever I've selected and I can just click and drag, and notice it just slides down the edge. Now, there's some problems here. I'm going to undo that real quick because I want you to be able to see what's happening on the nose, right? So you'll see if I go too far, some of this geometry is like stretching way out and we're getting major problems. And if I go the other way, bad things happen too, right? So really, I'm just going to slide this down a touch because I want to maintain the angle, but I don't want to go too far and make anything overlap. And you might notice that the nose is potentially starting to do that already. So I'm just going to slide this down a touch. And if you'll see, as soon as you see that little artifact pop up on the nose, that means bad things are happening. So I'm going to go ahead and just move that down a little bit. And then I should zoom in on the nose and make sure that I haven't done anything too terrible down here. And it doesn't look like it's, you know, it's down pretty far, but not super bad. But what I can do now is I can select points mode, and I can select this one point, and I can pull this point up that edge a little bit more, right? So I can slide this point along this edge, and I can kind of fix where that was getting dangerously close to being too far down the geometry. And if I go around and look now and see if I can see if there's any other areas where it really got out of whack, right? Like in this case, right, this point should be more or less in line with this other point, right? So it jumped way down. And this is just something that, you know, as you go through, you can see if there's any other place where really crazy things happened. And so far, so good. There's nothing to worry about there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start manipulating some of these other points so we can pull in the cabin. And so we could slide these. We can also just move these in the same plane. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use the live selection tool. I'm going to zoom in on these points that are right here by the end. I'm going to make sure I check mark only select visible elements because I don't want to select anything at the bottom of the geometry, right? I want to make sure I'm only selecting these top points, and I have successfully done that. And so now I'm just going to pull this in until it tapers down to that edge, right? So I've got those pulled in, and so far, right, there's no visible change to this model, and that's because what I need to do next is grab this point, and this point needs to get pulled down until it's, and it gets a little messy in here to see what's going on, but it needs to be pulled down so it's basically right around this area here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down, and we might need to do a few other points too, but we'll see how this works. So I'm going to pull these down. And I want you to note that this model is pretty rounded, and we'll talk about what's going on with that in a second. Now, there's a pretty big zigzag that happens here, so I'm going to go ahead and instead of manually manipulating this edge, I'm going to go ahead and pull this down using the slide tool. So I'm going to use the slide tool. I'm just going to drag this down until it's a little bit closer to where that should be. So I get a little something else. You know, and I don't know if that needs to be, if these other points back here are a little bit too far out or need to be manipulated. So you can see that this point is a little bit too far from the edge, so I'm going to sneak this in so it tapers in. I'm going to do the same thing with this point to bring this back here. Right, so I'm starting to get the shape of this thing, and now what I can do is I can use the move tool to pull these in a little bit closer, and this one probably doesn't necessarily need to go any closer, but I could, you know, I could pull that in. Now the other things are that maybe some of these points need to actually be lifted a little bit, or these need to be dropped a little bit further down, but we're starting to get the shape of the cockpit a little bit more clear. Okay, looks a little better than it did. Now the other thing we need to do is now we have these points here that are again a little bit too far out, so I just want to pull these in a touch so that those edges are straight. When we do that, it rounds the cockpit just a touch more, and if we looked at a model, we might decide, oh, we need to make a change there, but for now, We're going to leave it the way it is. Okay. All right, so we've started to make that shape a little bit better. I think there might be an issue where we still need, you know, this point to be maybe raised up a touch and pushed in a touch to give us that sense. But then, right, the rest of this cockpit is starting to not quite necessarily look right. So we'll see. We'll go ahead and undo that for the time being, and undo those two moves. And we're just going to leave it there for now. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. And this is one of those things where, right, you just continually refine the model, and right, it can take as long as you desire to make it take. It can be a really long process. Okay, so now what we need to do is what I'd like to do is be able to pull the wings out. Oh, actually, sorry. First, we need to move these points so we can adjust this angle here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my live selection tool to select all three of these points, right? Because we want these 3 points to more or less be in a line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my front view, and I'm going to pull these points down and out until they reach here. And then these other points here, these 3 points, I just want to make sure they're about where I want them to be, right, which is somewhere around here. And then this top ridge of points, I believe, should be significantly flatter. But let's go ahead and look at a different reference. Let's go to Safari, and let's just say X-Wing images. And so if I click on images for X-Wings and start looking at some of these models, yeah, the top of this, the body is really flat. And so we're going to go ahead and flatten that out as well. And let's see, is there anything else? Are there any other good images? There's all these, I mean, those are the more modern style. This is the, you know, original. But yeah, I think we just need to go ahead and flatten those out. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll just grab these 3 points here, and then we'll bring them down so they are more or less level. All right. Okay, so we flattened that out. And then we should probably just look, you know, see what it looks like around where the droid is supposed to sit in this thing. And I'm actually going to go to Tools here, Size, I'm going to say Large. And then I'm going to grab the best, the one that I can see the best from. They're all basically viewed from a very similar angle. So I'm going to go to this model website and see if I can see this image large. There we go, right? And this isn't the best model, but you can kind of see there's some cutouts here. There's some other body panel things happening. But it looks like it's pretty flat all the way behind that. So we'll go ahead and check one more reference. And let's see here. What's another good reference? This actually probably shows what we want to see on StarWars.com. Yeah, so it looks like in these images the droid sits up a little bit higher, even though when we look at our references to the original, right, they don't necessarily look like they're there. But let's go ahead and fix this so it's more accurate. So we could actually take these 3 points and maybe even lower them a little bit, or we could just take these 2 points and just raise them up a little bit so that they're level with those other points. And then when we do that, we should also raise these edge points up. And I'm going to zoom in on this side so I can pull this up as well. Right, and you can see I'm a little bit off the drawing, but it's making it a touch more accurate for the rest of the model. Okay, So we've got this set. You know, we might have some points in here that need to be pulled out some more, but let's go ahead and make the wings. Okay, because I could do this all day. All right, so let's go ahead, and to make the wings, what we need is we need a little bit more geometry, right? What we're going to do is we're going to extrude a couple of polygons. What we want is to cut this so that there's a couple polygons here, and then we'll do a couple cuts on the bottom so there's a couple polygons there that we can extrude out into wings. And so let's go ahead and use our knife tool again. So we're going to hit K and L for the loop cut. And I'm going to come back here to where I want this. And the wings are pretty narrow. And you can see that it comes out a little bit above the bottom. So I'm actually going to go ahead and make 2 cuts. I'm going to cut here. And then I'm going to come up a little bit. I'm going to click off in space, hit escape. I'm going to hit escape. That clears that little green line, which allows me to do another cut. And so I'm going to come up to where basically the top of the wing is, where it comes out of the side of the body. I'm going to cut again. Then I'm going to go down below to the top of the wing and cut, and then hit escape and make another cut, you know, just below the bottom of that wing too. Okay. All right, so I've created a lot more geometry here, and you'll see there's a little bit of an issue here with something's not right with the way that that's rendering, but that's all right. We'll figure that out later. Okay, so we've got all of these polygons here. So let's go ahead and go into polygons mode, and I'm going to use the space bar so I can do live selection. And you'll notice that right now it's unintentionally selecting multiple polygons. So I want to make sure that I zoom in to the right level that I can just select the 2 that I want, right? These 2 are going to be extruded into the wing. And they do, if we, you know, they basically, hold on a second. This extends far beyond where we need it to be, right? And there's actually a lot of points. I should have manipulated the the geometry before I made all of these cuts, but we're just going to leave it square at the back for now, for the sake of speed. But when I do this, this one's in pretty good shape, but I actually need this wing to terminate here. So I'm going to go ahead and use my loop cut tool again. So I'm going to say K and L. And I'm going to come in here and hover basically where the back of the wing is. Technically, I think that's part of the wing too, but we'll just leave that as part of the body. And I'm going to do one more cut. And I'm going to use the space bar. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to select these 2 polygons one more time. And now I'm going to go ahead and use the extrude tool to pull these out. And when I pull them out, they're not going to be quite aligned where we want them to be, but we can start that what we're going to do, we're going to start it and then manipulate things. So the letter D on the keyboard is the quick key for the extrude tool, or we can click on that button. And I'm going to click and drag and just start pulling a wing out until I reach the edge of where I want to go. And when I'm done with that, if all of my angles are correct on the body of this X-wing, those wings should align pretty accurately with the wings in the drawing. Now you'll notice that I'm at the edge of the wing here, but the wing extends a little further in this direction. I'm not going to worry about that right now. We're going to just model as closely as we can and be happy with what we get. Okay, so we've got this wing extended out. Now the other issue is that the shape of this wing changes. It cuts in around where the engine is and terminates here, and then also this should be significantly closer to this side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to points mode. We are going to hit the space bar. We're going to uncheck only select visible elements. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to manipulate the points on this side so that we can manipulate this. Now, I did this only select visible elements, and something I might want to do because I know when I move this edge up, it's going to make this geometry pretty uneven. And so what I want to do is I kind of want to pull all of these points in. And there's a couple ways I can do that. I can just use the move tool and start to pull these in until they are at the right angle. Right? That's probably the easiest. I could also use the slide tool. Now that I've got that set, what I want to do is I want to do a cut, and it may be two cuts, but I want to do a cut where this, right, where I want to be able to pull a point out here but have another point in there. So I'm going to do K and L, and I'm going to make a cut at the area where it should be lowest and a cut where I want that point to extend out. And once I've done those two cuts, then if I hit the space bar and I grab all of those points there and I pull these down, right, I've now created a much more accurate looking wing. And I'm going to leave these points here. I mean, I could grab them all and just snug them down just a touch if I wanted to keep these angles more parallel. But really, right, ideally this kind of splits the difference between these two edges. Okay, so let's look at this in 3D view. So we've got our wings started, the top wing. And so let's go ahead and do the bottom wing. So we've already basically got things set here, and we just need to pull the wing out from these two polygons. So let's go back to polygons mode, and zoom in, select these two polygons, hit the letter D, and click and drag to pull. Oh boy. Why is it not letting me extend this as far in the other direction? I'm going to go ahead and hit undo, because I really do want this to be as few polygons as possible. I'm going to come all the way over here and click and drag and see if I can get this to extend a little bit further. I have no idea why it's choosing to limit the length of this, but let's say we know, let's see if we can send this out to 100 and not 120, but we're going to set this offset to, let's say, 240 and see where we get. And when we do it numerically like this, we put the value in and then we click apply. And it shot it out almost exactly the same distance. Let's undo that and then let's set it to 250. Okay, that's pretty accurate with the top wing. And you'll notice that our angle is off by a hair. And so if we switch we have those end polygons still selected. And if we switch our axis, you'll notice that, right, the world axis, it's a little bit different than this, but we can go ahead and just move all of these points up until the wing aligns with where it should be. And now that we've done that, we can go probably to our polygon view to this view, because it's going to be really hard to see where this, like, to not cut the wrong wing, being that this top one is above it. And really what we should have done is probably modeled the bottom wing first, but that's all right. So I'm going to hit the letter K and L because I want to do these loop cuts again. And so now that I'm working in my perspective view, but I'm looking at my top view to get this alignment correct. So I'm going to go ahead and pop one in there, and then I'm going to go ahead and pop another cut in there. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that mode. I'm going to hit space to do live selection. I'm going to go to points mode. And once I'm in points mode, I'm going to make sure I select these 2 points, and then I can just actually I don't need to, sorry. I can select these 2 points, and I can pull these down so they make this angle. And then I'm going to go ahead and select all 4 of those points. I want to make sure I got them all so that I don't make the geometry go crazy. And then I'm going to pull these forward. I don't know why that other view is not updating, but there we go. Weird. And then I just want to make sure it's aligned with that top wing. Okay, so if I rotate around, I now have, right, an X-wing with wings extending out from the sides. This is, again, a great time to save your project. Okay, so the next things we need to do, there's a lot of detail that can be added, that you can continue to add, and I want to show you how to push or pull a little detail into this geometry so you could go forward and continue to make cuts and make additional changes to this geometry. We'll do that in the next tutorial, and then we're going to look at building the engines very quickly, and maybe like really roughing in the blasters or photon cannons, or I can't remember what they're called. But so those are the things that we're going to do in the next tutorial.